Mark Carney just flew to Beijing, shook hands with Xi Jinping, and came home with what he's calling a landmark trade arrangement. Doug Ford took one look at it and basically said, "Are you kidding me right now?" Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where today we're diving into the political firestorm that's got Ontario's Premier absolutely losing it over a trade deal that swaps canola access for Chinese electric vehicles. If you thought the tariff drama was spicy before, buckle up, because Doug Ford just turned the heat up to nuclear. Let's break down why Ontario's top politician thinks Carney just sold out the entire auto sector for some oilseed crops. Picture this. It's the early hours of Friday morning. Most of Canada is asleep, probably dreaming about hockey or Tim Hortons or whatever normal Canadians dream about. Mark Carney's in Beijing, fresh off a meeting with Xi Jinping, and he's about to announce what he genuinely believes is a diplomatic win. He probably practiced his victory speech on the plane. Maybe even rehearsed a few humble smiles in the bathroom mirror. He steps up, announces this landmark trade arrangement, and you can almost hear the champagne corks popping in the federal government offices. Meanwhile, back in Ontario, Doug Ford is reading the details of this deal, and you can practically see the steam coming out of his ears. Because what Carney's calling a landmark achievement, Ford's calling a complete and total disaster. And he's not being subtle about it. This is Doug Ford at maximum volume, and when Doug Ford gets loud, you better pay attention because things are about to get interesting. So what exactly is in this deal that's got Ford so worked up? Here's the trade. China agrees to reduce tariffs on certain Canadian canola imports. Sounds good, right? Our farmers get better access to Chinese markets, they can sell more canola, everyone's happy. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. In exchange for that canola access, Canada's going to allow a small but growing number of Chinese electric vehicles to enter our market at a preferential tariff rate. Translation: we're lowering the drawbridge and letting Chinese EVs walk right in at discounted prices. Now, remember just a hot second ago when we talked about how Canada slapped a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs? Yeah, that was literally the whole point. Protect the domestic auto industry, give Canadian manufacturers breathing room, prevent a flood of cheap Chinese imports from decimating our market. That was the strategy. That was the plan. And now, according to Ford, Carney just traded it away for canola. It's like selling your car for bus tokens. Sure, you can get around, but was that really the best deal you could make? Ford's not mincing words here. He's calling this deal lopsided, dangerous, and a betrayal of Ontario's auto sector. And when the Premier of Ontario, the province that's basically the beating heart of Canada's automotive industry, says a federal trade deal is a disaster, that's not just political posturing. That's a 5-alarm fire in the middle of a powder keg. Let's talk about what Ford's actually worried about, because it's not just generic protectionism or knee-jerk reaction. Ford's concern is that this opens the floodgates to cheap Chinese electric vehicles without any real guarantee of equal or immediate investments in Canada's economy, auto sector, or supply chain. In other words, we're giving China access to our market, but what are we getting besides the ability to sell them more canola? Are Chinese companies building factories here? Are they creating Canadian jobs? Are they transferring technology? Or are we just becoming a dumping ground for their overproduction while our own manufacturers get undercut? It's like inviting someone to your party, letting them eat all your food, and they don't even bring a bottle of wine. Except instead of a party, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that employs hundreds of thousands of Canadians, and instead of wine, we're talking about economic sovereignty. Slightly higher stakes. But wait, there's more. Ford's not just worried about Chinese competition in Canada. He's worried about what this does to our relationship with the United States. And this is where things get really complicated, like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while riding a roller coaster complicated. The United States is Canada's largest export destination for automobiles. It's not even close. When we build cars in Ontario, most of them are heading south across the border. The entire Canadian auto industry is integrated with the American auto industry like peanut butter and jelly, like hockey and fighting, like Canada and apologizing. Now, the Americans are currently in their own anti-China phase. They've got their own massive tariffs on Chinese EVs. They're trying to build a North American supply chain that doesn't rely on China. And here comes Canada, their friendly neighbor to the north, cutting a deal that gives Chinese electric vehicles preferential access to the Canadian market. How do you think that's going to play in Washington? Spoiler alert, not great. Ford's warning is that by lowering tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, this deal risks closing the door on Canadian automakers to the American market. Because if we're letting Chinese EVs in through the side door, the Americans might decide that Canadian-made vehicles are now a security risk or a loophole in their own trade protections. They could slap tariffs on us, restrict our access, or just make life miserable for Canadian exporters. And if that happens, Ford's absolutely right that it would hurt our economy and lead to job losses. Massive job losses. The kind that end political careers and wreck entire communities. Think about it like this. You and your friend have an agreement that you're both going to boycott a certain store because they treat workers badly. Then you turn around and start shopping there anyway because they're having a sale. How's your friend going to react? They're going to feel betrayed, they're going to question whether they can trust you, and they might just decide that if you're not keeping your end of the bargain, they're not keeping theirs either. That's essentially what Ford thinks is happening with the United States right now. So Carney's standing there in Beijing, thinking he's pulled off this brilliant diplomatic maneuver, balancing agricultural interests with automotive policy, threading the needle between Chinese demands and Canadian needs. Meanwhile, Ford's back home going, you just traded away our entire auto sector for canola. It's the political equivalent of thinking you're a genius for trading your house for a really nice bicycle. Sure, the bicycle's great, but where are you going to sleep? And Ford's not stopping at criticism. He's got demands. He's telling Carney and the federal government that if they want to fix this mess, they need to urgently step up and support Ontario's auto sector. Not with platitudes, not with press releases, but with actual concrete action. Ford wants them to make the sector more competitive by ending the electric vehicle mandate. He wants harmonized regulations with key trading partners, which is code for get on the same page as the Americans so we don't lose access to their market. And he wants to scrap federal fees that add thousands to the cost of making vehicles and chase away investments. Basically, Ford's saying if you're going to sell us out on tariffs, the least you can do is remove every other regulatory burden that's making it harder for Canadian automakers to compete. It's damage control, it's crisis management, and it's Ford trying to salvage what he sees as a catastrophic federal blunder. Now, let's be fair for a second. Canola farmers are probably pretty happy with this deal. Western Canada's agricultural sector has been getting hammered by Chinese tariffs, and if this opens up market access, that's real money in real pockets for real Canadian farmers. They've been collateral damage in this trade war, and they deserve relief. But here's the brutal political calculus. There are way more jobs in Ontario's auto sector than there are in canola farming. The economic impact of losing automotive manufacturing dwarfs the gains from increased canola exports. So from Ford's perspective, Carney just traded a major industry for a minor one, and called it a win. This is the problem with trade deals. They create winners and losers, and the losers tend to be really, really loud about it. Canola farmers might love Carney right now, but auto workers in Oshawa or Windsor are looking at this deal and wondering if their jobs just got shipped to Shanghai. And Doug Ford, who represents a province where the auto industry is basically economic bedrock, is channeling that anxiety into full-throated opposition. The timing couldn't be worse either. The global auto industry is in the middle of the biggest transition since the invention of the assembly line. Electric vehicles are taking over, and whoever dominates EV production is going to have enormous economic power for decades to come. Canada's trying to position itself in this new reality, trying to build battery plants, attract investment, develop a domestic EV supply chain. And right in the middle of that effort, the federal government cuts a deal that potentially undercuts the whole strategy by letting Chinese competitors in at discount prices. It's like training for a marathon and then deciding to start smoking the week before the race. Carney probably thought he was being clever. Balance agricultural interests with automotive concerns, give a little to get a little, show that Canada can negotiate with China despite broader Western tensions. But in politics, being clever doesn't matter if everyone thinks you're wrong. And right now, Doug Ford is making sure everyone knows he thinks this deal is catastrophically wrong. Here's what happens next. Ford's going to keep hammering Carney on this. There's going to be pressure from the auto industry, from unions, from anyone whose livelihood depends on Canadian automotive manufacturing. The federal government is going to have to defend this deal, explain why it makes sense, and probably make some kind of compensation or support package for Ontario to calm things down. And the whole time, everyone's going to be watching the American reaction, because if the US decides this is a problem, all the canola access in the world isn't going to save us from the economic fallout. This is Canadian politics at its messiest. Federal versus provincial, agriculture versus manufacturing, pragmatism versus principle, and all of it wrapped up in the broader question of how we deal with China while staying aligned with the United States. There's no easy answer, which is probably why Carney thought splitting the difference was the smart play. But Doug Ford just called his bluff, and now we're going to see whether this landmark trade arrangement is actually a masterstroke or a disaster waiting to happen. If you made it through all of that, congratulations, you now understand more about Canadian trade policy than most of Parliament. Smash that subscribe button because we're covering every twist and turn of this story as it develops, and trust me, it's going to develop. Drop a comment and tell me, is Ford right to be furious, or is this just provincial grandstanding? I want to hear what you think. This is Canadian Insights, cutting through the noise and bringing you the political drama that actually matters. Catch you in the next one.